I haven't watched like YTV or Teletoon or Family Channel probably in like 10 years.
I just started subscribing to Teletoon again for the first time in 5 years. I've not watched the channel at all since then. And well, I mean, fair enough. We have no reason to watch like YTV now that there's no Bionics or anything. So
you love Nickelodeon sitcoms though, Jesse. They are your favorite thing.
How dare you reveal my dark secret publicly, Karl?
I know that you have Sam and Cat action figures. The vastly greater indictment is that I would know the name of any of those shows. How do you even know that? It's like, because I am a pop culture sponge.
I don't know. It's just, I don't remember shows being that campy and patronizing when I was growing up, but...
I feel like it's amped up a bit. It's amped up a little bit.
At least I'm not going crazy.
Well, it's what kids seem to gravitate towards now, and what always gets me is when you go on like the YTV social media site and you see these guys on there that are like, oh man, like, why are you showing this stuff? There's no way kids like this stuff. Show the stuff I like. Kids love that. It's like, I'm done with the station.
You're a grown-ass man. You should be.
Why don't you cater to me? You're a children's network. I'm in my 30s.
And I am a
I'm your
children.
target demographic. Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome to Zon and Canada. I'm your host, Jesse Betteridge. Karl is joining us again today.
Hey, what's up?
And we also have a newcomer. She's a local cosplayer from Vancouver, Brittney.
Hi everyone.
This episode, we're sort of picking up where we left off last time. Specifically, we're looking at the big changes that have been going on with Adult Swim Canada over the last 2 or 3 weeks. We're also going to review the big shakeup that's been happening on Canadian television in that same time, mostly with channels owned by Corus Entertainment. And if you're not familiar with Corus Entertainment, they are the company that owns YTV, they own Teletoon, they own Nick Canada, they own Cartoon Network Canada, they own Adult Swim Canada, and Corus is owned by Shaw. It's like that's a public secret. But anyway,
maybe just to clarify, what don't they own in children's television at this point in Canada? What's left?
They don't own Family Channel. They don't own what is currently Disney XD and Disney Junior, but they're soon going to be changing into Family Charged, and I should point out that the charged in that is spelt CHRGD. So
that's terrible.
And actually, before the original proposed name of the channel was Family Extreme, and Extreme was spelled XTRM. So they're convinced that boys 6 to 11 really hate vowels.
Ermagerd, Family Charged.
and also Disney Junior will be changing into Family Junior, and those 3 stations are owned by DHX. And then there is also BBC Kids, which is owned by Knowledge Network. So we're going to talk about a lot of things that are getting mixed up now. We're going to continue to get really mixed up over the next few months. We're going to kind of parse through that in the middle section. And at the end, we're going to talk a little about what these changes could potentially mean for anime on Canadian TV, and the outlook on that particular front is actually a little more positive than you might think. But first, we're gonna start with the Adult Swim stuff. And Karl, I think the last time we talked about this, in the last episode, we were maybe a little optimistic in our outlook.
I think we were way too hopeful because we thought, well, clearly they're just gonna start with the crappy announcements and then. And I shouldn't say crappy, but like the low rent announcements, and then build up to the higher rent stuff. But the highest rent stuff they have is shows that ran on Fox's ADHD block, which was 100% conceived as an Adult Swim knockoff, ironically, by Nick Weidenfeld. So I mean, and I love the shows that they picked up out of that. Axe Cop's hilarious. I'm never going to say no to more Nick Offerman, let alone with guest voices from people like Tyler, the Creator. That's just, that cartoon's great. I'm all about it. But I've watched all of it from it airing on Fox. And similarly, they picked up Cool and the Insatiable, which Jesse and I's friend Corey has done boards on. Fantastic show. I'm glad it's done so well in its transition from being on ADHD to the mainstream Fox Sunday block. But again, not what you expect to pick up for Adult Swim Canada. And those were, by the way, those were the bright spots. I'll let Jesse talk about the sad spots.
If you're not aware, Adult Swim Canada actually launched back in 2012, the other half of Cartoon Network Canada. Up until earlier this month, very few people actually got it. So very few people actually got to experience just how incredibly disappointing Adult Swim Canada was. It consisted almost entirely of 10-year-old reruns. They had like the first 4 seasons of Aqua Teen Hunger Force running continuously. What happened, since our last episode, was that Corus shut down Teletoon Retro.
R.I.P.
And R.I.P.
Oh yeah, my childhood.
The childhood for many people. That channel made a point of encapsulating many childhoods. Mm-hmm. And in exchange, they expanded Cartoon Network Canada to 5 million new homes. Depending on what provider you had, Teletoon Retro may have been replaced with Cartoon Network Canada. This meant that CN Canada and Adult Swim Canada would be reaching many new eyeballs, and including the 3 of us who had never actually been able to watch either of those networks before. When we did the last episode, Adult Swim Canada again began hyping up their all-new lineup, and they started making announcements of new shows. The first was Night Sweats, which is an original production. It's a combination of animation and live-action segments, which was co-produced by Teletoon and Blue Ant Media. By the end of the week, what happened was the website Channel Canada posted a press release documenting all the changes that would be happening to Cartoon Network Canada and Adult Swim Canada, as well as the full schedules for both halves of the network. What would happen was that Cartoon Network Canada would be inheriting a lot of Teletoon original productions, which were being shuffled around because of Teletoon Retro stuff was being crammed into the main Teletoon lineup. Adult Swim Canada's full slate was unveiled that revealed a few key things. First, as we mentioned before, all those ADHD titles were coming on. And they also picked up the much reviled Napoleon Dynamite animated series.
Boo.
What was really puzzling about that, apart from the fact that they picked up a very unpopular 6-episode show, was the fact that it actually, if you look at their schedule, it actually shows up 5 times a week. It gets played more than anything else. Even Night Sweats, which is Canadian content, only gets played 4 times a week. Napoleon Dynamite gets 5 airings.
Because apparently in Canada it's 2003.
But this made it clear that no Adult Swim originals were being added, and including highly demanded titles like Rick and Morty. The second was that, with the exception of Archer, all the content from Teletoon's adult block, Teletoon at Night, was being moved to Adult Swim. Third, and what was probably the most outrageous announcement, was that Adult Swim would be adding a movie block on Sunday nights, obviously so they could carry on Teletoon at Night's bad habit of playing random live-action movies, which is kind of like rubbing it in, because Sunday nights is when the American Adult Swim plays all the premieres for their original animated programming. So we don't get any of that, but we get Dodgeball, a true underdog story instead. If you look at the social media response, it has been very obviously negative. If you don't believe me, just go to Adult Swim Canada's Facebook page. There are basically 3 types of people who are posting anything on there. You have people who are demanding anime or a Toonami block. You have people who are demanding Rick and Morty. And then you have some people who are very obviously friends with the staff of Night Sweat. So kind of before we dive into this, have either of you really had a chance to watch Adult Swim Canada yet? Any kind of impressions?
Yeah. And as somebody who watched the inception of the original block in the United States, I guess 15 years ago now, it's weird because there are moments that are very much like the original block because they're still running the Brack show, which is and they ran that into the ground on Adult Swim US, but they don't still run it. And it's a great show, but it's just like it's played, it's run out, and I think even here makes no sense to continue to air. There's some really weird choices, and the other thing is they've got all the Fox shows that you would use to typically line up your opening for the block. They're using them much more sparingly than they should. They should be running. You're going to have Futurama and American Dad and Family Guy. Those should be getting each a couple airings a night in your Monday through Friday as a way of padding the lineup, and that's not happening. They brought over stuff that people don't like because, I mean, I guess they're doing Forget About It Season 3, but it's not. Adult Swim would never even ironically option something like that. It's a mediocre.
Should have been Angora napkin.
It's just ridiculous because it's not at all to the spirit you want. I mean, they've got that ad for Aqua Teen Hunger Force, which is just a clip from the show that doesn't even use the right font for Adult Swim. Like,
and that ad is a full minute long, and it is basically zero effort, and they run it about 6 times an hour.
I mean, they do
Jeez.
end that clip on just the right note. They end it on the "I fought them off with my nudity." And like, okay, like that's a very Adult Swim thing in a sense to do, to run a minute of like the most boring possible bit about Aqua Teen Hunger Force, only to end it on an incredibly Aqua Teen Hunger Force joke. But you could do like 5 or 6 other versions of that ad where again you just pick one of those like lulls in the show and end it on like the shock joke.
Well, that's the whole thing, is that Adult Swim has this minimalism to it that in the US version really allowed them to kind of explore new artistic depths that you typically can't on a television station. Because just everything's so simple, they can, experiment with all this stuff a lot more easily than they normally could, and with a very limited budget. Adult Swim Canada seems to just use that as an excuse to be as lazy as possible.
Well, it's weird too, because like they brought other stuff. Like some of the packaging they've got is obviously very recent because it's stuff that's been commissioned in the past couple of years. For Adult Swim, they're running all of the wonderful, or at least they seem to be gradually cycling through all the wonderful bumpers that David O'Reilly did, and that a bunch of other animators.
Those are great. I haven't caught those myself, but I'm glad they are running them.
Yeah.
If you're not aware, they're those. If you may have caught them, they're those really weird North Korea propaganda style bumpers.
Yeah, that look like 8-bit, all done in like clearly pseudo Atari-esque visuals, and yeah, just they're as if they're actual propaganda from the DPRK, which is genius.
And I hope they keep getting new stuff like that. That's good.
Yeah, like there's hints that they could do this really well, and further underlined by the fact that like I found myself watching the main channel on Labor Day just like locked in. I was just, when it was during the day during CN, I mean, it was the only time I switched the channel when I'm like, actually I don't want to watch Total Drama Island. That like, so skip that hour. But then immediately flip back. It's Clarence, or it's Gumball, or it's Adventure Time, or it's Steven Universe, and like so, like they're some of these are things that I've seen repeatedly. Like the Adventure Time they're running and right now is like right from the beginning, and I've seen the crap out of that, and I'm still like, no, it's on. So like they could have that level of magnetic draw to Adult Swim. Like if they're running like current Adult Swim stuff, like if I flipped in and it was like the new Tim and Eric horror show, which albeit is super creepy but also hilarious. If they're running, like, obviously Rick and Morty would be a guaranteed. Just leave the dial there. I mean, if they want to pick up a 6-episode show, they should have just picked up Fully Cooley. But just saying, it's 6 episodes.
Yeah.
It ran on Adult Swim instead of Fox, and would be like that alone. They could get away with literally. They could get away with literally every other sin in the book. We wouldn't even care about all the other crap they pulled if they had picked up just one 6-episode OVA. That's it, and they would have bought them so much credit.
Just going back to the Aqua Teen Hunger Force ad, I think one of the infuriating things about that is not just the ad itself and how kind of slapdash it was. I think the fact that it runs so many times an hour is because they have too many ad breaks. They have as many as 4 ad breaks running during a show, whereas when you watch the Adult Swim in the US. It has a very specific kind of flow to it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because there are only 2 ad breaks every half hour. You have one ad break in the middle of the show, and then one after the end credits of the show. It seems like they're kind of trying to somewhat emulate that by putting some ads after the credits, but as a result, you're getting, like, on a lot of shows, you're getting ads before the ending credits and then after the ending credits.
Yeah.
And that just results in, like, the same ads running over and over again. I know that it's really difficult for these channels to negotiate things like the number of ads that they run per hour, but for Adult Swim Canada, like, they've got to do it.
I feel like they could have just blocked them together. Like if you just do 2 ad breaks an hour, same number of ads, but just or not 2 ad breaks per hour, 2 ad breaks per half hour. You can run.
When they run the 11-minute shows, they do.
Yeah.
So I mean, they can do it, but they choose not to during the 22-minute shows, and that's when they just bombard you with 4 ad breaks with the same ads over and over again. Like I just feel like, they need to, even if they have to go, I know they have to go up a couple pay grades to find someone who can authorize something like this, but I think they've got to work toward cutting down those number of ad breaks. I think that's going to be really important to just mastering the flow that the block has.
Again, I also feel like they don't have that problem on the main network. Like, because everything like the Cartoon Network does now is packaged as an 11-minute with credits, like it doesn't have this problem on the main network because you watch 4 episodes or at least 2 episodes of any of these current shows. And the other thing is they're running Steven Universe, which is in production right now. They're running Clarence, they're running all the stuff that is Uncle Grandpa, all the stuff that's being made right now, very fresh. And again, it feels watching the main network doesn't feel that different to watching the main network in the States. CN Canada and CN US are, outside of, again, some of the Teletoon imports, which, to be fair, some of those Teletoon imports aired on Cartoon Network US, so it's not like it's actually, in a sense, bringing those on to CN Canada lines certain things up even better.
It seems like they care about Cartoon Networks a lot, right? Like you had mentioned, and they've put in the effort to put in some quality programming to make sure they bring in shows from the U.S. Cartoon Network to make it work. And then it feels like they just thought to themselves, hey, you know what? Cartoon Network's successful, and in the U.S. everyone loves Adult Swim, so let's just throw that on Canadian television and see what happens. And just not really care.
Yeah, just like with Target.
Like I had mentioned the other day, it's just like Target. They brought the brand name, built up all this hype. We're all thinking we're gonna get that like same Target brand, that same Adult Swim brand, and then they reveal this horrible lineup and they expect us to lap it up. And instead, everyone's like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah,
and then they're shocked when nobody's excited.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's that bit of the exact same problem. The outside looks right, as And ironically, I worked at a Target in the U.S. when I was in community college. So it's like I'm very familiar with like how a Target should look and feel. And I'm like, when I walked into the first one here, I'm like, it looks right. And then you go to look for certain things that you expect to be able to get, or you expect to be able to get them at a certain price or with a certain level of availability, which kind of lines up very similar to programming. You expect certain shows to be there at certain times. Like Target, it's absent on Adult Swim, and it's worrisome because
just like how just about everything was absent from the shelves on Target.
That was later on. Yes.
No, that was from the beginning, Carl.
I feel like there was a point at which they kind of had stuff, but they never had the right stuff. And I think it's the problem here. It's not necessarily that the shelves are bare. It's just with the wrong things. The wrong things are in the wrong spots. And it's very perplexing beyond the possibility that like this is a whole different content package deal and they just want too much. It's too rich for their blood to get some of this stuff. In which case, fine, go use all the sweet tax credits to make something similar to fill its place. Don't just do Night Sweats. That should be the tip of an iceberg. There are a lot of unemployed, great animator creatives here that could give you weird, crazy Adult Swim style bullshit.
I have to say though, I think I'm the only one of the three of us who actually watched Night Sweats last week. I actually liked it. I thought it was very good. It was quite entertaining. The live action segments, they were kind of derivative of Tim and Eric, but they were derivative in a competent way. The animated segments I thought were all at least passable. I like Crack Duck in particular. And there's apparently more of a variety that's going to come throughout the course of the show. It's pretty adult. They actually, they have uncensored F-bombs and stuff.
Which that's the other thing. Adult Swim Canada is in a position of actually taking it to some way more extreme limits than even Adult Swim US could.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily why you watch it. You don't necessarily watch it because it's transgressive in that fashion. But at the very least, you can be like, you could run uncensored Aqua Teen Hunger Force episodes up here. And it would be like, that would be one of the ways that you may have seen this before, pirated, whatever, but you haven't seen it like this, unless you showed up for the DVDs you can't find up here, so you probably did. Boom. And you just sold the show for you.
There's so much that you can do. I mean, they're less in that regard. They're so much less restrained. than the US version of the network, but they do absolutely nothing to take advantage of that, and it doesn't seem like they really care to. But I mean, Night Sweats, it pushes the content boundaries a little bit. I don't think it's good enough that people in the States are going to be clamoring for it on their block or anything, but I could see it running on the US Adult Swim block.
It seems like something that would be easy pick up. Like, we'll just throw this on here because it's done.
Yeah, and it's also 26 episodes, each 22 minutes, which is probably a bigger season order than anything that has ever been on Adult Swim US, or at least any original production on Adult Swim US that we've seen. And I think even in the worst case scenario, this would be really good CanCon filler just to sort of strip every day and run into the ground like they do with Forget About It. But at least with something like Night Sweats, I mean, I don't feel personally offended when I have it on in the background. Also, I noticed that earlier last week they had some of the cards running. You know, the cards with their, the white text and the black background. They're usually written by interns or people working at Adult Swim, and they show up after the ad breaks on certain shows. They were running for a few days and they seemed to disappear. And I have to say those cards weren't really that great, but I think it's really important they try to keep that going even if they're not like the best quality, because it really makes it feel like there are actual people running the network rather than just a computer running it, which but just that little bit of effort is appreciated. And also worth pointing out that in the States, they usually don't start running the cards till like 11 p.m. because 11 p.m. is when, the Fox shows end and the originals start and the Adult Swim block really begins. But I mean, here they're already rerunning stuff by midnight.
That's another big problem with it is it's a 3-peat or 4-peat. Whereas the main...
They don't have any 4-peats, thankfully, but there are 3.
Yeah, no. Well, especially, again, if you had no content. But, I mean, part of what made Adult Swim work very early on is they understood they had no content. So it was Sunday premiere, Thursday rerun, and in like a 3-hour block. So they, it took everything they could in there. And even then, in that 3-hour block, they had multiple different 15-minute shows. They had Harvey Birdman, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, C-Lab, and Brack, and home movies for reruns, and Cowboy Bebop. And that was still, like, that's so much more content than what we have right now, or it feels like so much more. And they packed it in a tight spot for maximum impact. And that was before the fancier cards, by which I mean the simpler cards, but I mean they took everything they could to make that zone work. Oh, and they had, of course, Space Ghost episodes as well. But I mean, that's the whole thing. I'm forgetting that tiny little block. I'm forgetting some of what they had initially, and that's just not the problem here. They're taking a tiny little block, making it smaller than it needs to be, and then just running it again and again and again throughout every day.
Overall, it really seems that they've underestimated the expectations that come along with this brand. Because I mean, I think their big mistake, and I think we can all probably have different opinions on what resulted in this huge, horrible backlash that it got. But I think that one of the big mistakes was that they had the gall to hype it up at all. They thought, and I mean, they seemed so surprised by the bad reaction. But I think the reason the reaction was so bad was because they hyped up something that did not fit in the expectations people have, and people have very specific expectations for Adult Swim. They want new Adult Swim originals. Mm-hmm. They want, a Toonami block, which you will overwhelmingly see demand for on their social media. In fact, even if you compare it to, say, the Adult Swim UK Facebook page, you'll notice there are some people on there demanding a Toonami block, but it's nothing compared to what you see on the Adult Swim Canada page. I mean, do you think if they just quietly added these shows that it would that the reception would have been better?
I think if they hadn't billed it as going from a kiddie pool to going to the swimming pool at the Bellagio, it might have gone over a little better. I'm just saying, if they built it as going from a kiddie pool to like an above ground pool at your friend's house, I'd be like, yeah, that's about right. But they made it sound like this was going to be a big front to back overhaul, and it's like, no, you went from like. Realistically, you went from a kiddie pool to like with the hard plastic sides to the inflatable kind that's a little deeper.
It actually just occurred to me earlier that I don't think that any of these acquisitions were actually meant for Adult Swim Canada either.
It was like they very obviously, and it's fine because in a sense, this is oddly enough a proudly Adult Swim thing to do. They had acquisitions set up probably very much for Teletoon at night. And honestly, for Teletoon at night, all those ADHD pickups would have been like awesome. Like I would have been I would have been unironically been like, yeah, they're clearly trying to try now. A golf class.
Yeah, like there would have been some like some scoffs at Napoleon Dynamite, but apart from that,
well,
I think
Napoleon Dynamite would have been easily outweighed by Axe Cop and Golan. You would have been like, shit, that's very, that's an on the move thing. It's not what you expect because you don't have those expectations of Teletoon at night as a brand. But like I said, it's actually kind of a very proudly Adult Swim thing because when they started Adult Swim Action, of course, it was largely started with shows that had very clearly been intended at most to be aired at midnight on Toonami's Midnight Run block. So they were PG edited for that kind of PG, which is in some ways a much more stringent PG at that point, as opposed to. One second, there's a lot of.
Sorry, whatever. Deal with it. You're eating dinner.
Hey, Danielle.
They say hello.
You wish you could eat this food.
She said you do, though. It's really delicious. So.
Is that your wife or girlfriend?
Yes, that's my wife. I'm married. Squid Billy's this up. Okay, let's set my bed up and back in. Borrowing content is from a different block that you had originally intended for a different block is a very Adult Swim thing to do because Adult Swim Action was built on stuff that was at most set up for Toonami's Midnight Run by editing. For example, they ran I think Gundam 0083, so Stardust Memories.
Don't ask why I know that off the top of my head.
You're a huge nerd, just like me. And they ran Pilot Candidate, which would have edited, which is already a bad show, but edited to TVY7 is just incoherent. And it's not terribly coherent, to start with. And it's actually the worst show to try and string out over 13 weeks, as well. It would have been much better aired on Toonami, where you can at least digest the whole thing in 2.5 weeks. So in a sense, this borrowing actually feels like kind of a classic Adult Swim move. But I don't think people want the Adult Swim that's finding itself at this point. They want what you have right now. They want to just shortcut directly to this point, and especially seeing again the main network shortcut directly to the Cartoon Network of today.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing: if they were running this as a true Adult Swim block, they would be, even if they weren't, being able to meet everyone's expectations, they would be going out of their way to be self-deprecating and just making fun of themselves for, all these problems that are going on. They would be totally transparent about it because, again, that kind of self-deprecating nature is part of...
Very much part of the Adult Swim ethos, for sure. They would crack jokes on... I mean, they ran a card when they were running Fully Cooley about how Kyle Pope, a good friend of mine who used to do edit lists for Anime News Network, they said, Kyle Pope makes us cry for pointing out our little edits. And it's just the fact that they would do that they would just directly address one of their most vocal online critics head on, both mocking the fact that they do have to edit stuff for television, somewhat heavily at that point, even for an adult block, while also sort of saying hey, by the way, in case you didn't know, we do this. Radical transparency for television. Just unheard of radical transparency for television, and that's if they had opened up with so shit went crazy last week, and we just found out we're in 5 million more homes, and we have nothing to show for it. So we're gonna steal from our friends at Teletoon and give you a few new things while we work out what the fuck to do. If that had been a card, people have been like, hell yes, you're on, keep going.
That is exactly what they should have done. I agree with you because I mean, there's so much out of. I think there's the people who are running Adult Swim Canada right now, or perhaps Person. I don't really know. They obviously don't have a lot of control over the situation. Probably less so for whoever's running the Facebook page. But I mean, man, I don't think that Adult Swim can really function the way that it's supposed to in that totally transparent, self-deprecating way under Corus. They're too micromanaging. Because that's the thing. Turner is not micromanaging. If anything, they are against synergy to a fault, sort of as we talked about in the last episode.
It's not even that. It's also they are very much willing to entrust capable people, and they will look for capable people in every corner of their enterprise. I mean, Mike Lasso famously started in TBS's mailroom. And they happen to be doing this thing. They're going to do a cartoon thing, and they, you want to try for this? You got to do a quiz on classic cartoons, which of course he smashes. So like, all right, you're running this Cartoon Network. We've got all this library off of buying up Hanna-Barbera. Figure out how to make a network out of this. And I don't think there's that level of trust at all in Corus to be like, hey, we got all this stuff. Figure out how to schedule it. Whoever's the biggest nerd that we can get our hands on in our organization. And that may also speak to that there may be nobody inside of Corus that they could get that fits that bill. Like Mike Lazo is a rare talent. He is in the same league as Fred Sabert. He's one of those like as much as Sabert managed to define the early voice of MTV and then went on to many things. Lazo sort of, Sabert was that in the 80s. Lazo has done that for the 90s and onwards. So it's a tough place. Like I'm not sure like if there's somebody they can get or that they understand that they should get to do that inside of their or Adult Swim.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people who like that who work at Corus, but
they're not allowed to do what they need to do.
They can't do what they need to do. But right now, it's, as we've kind of implied throughout this episode, it's especially a big mess over there. And the reason why Corus is such a huge mess right now, if you didn't already know, and I haven't mentioned up to this point for reasons of just totally contrived dramatic buildup, it's because of the Disney Channel, which just launched on September 1st. That was launched by Corus because earlier this year, Corus acquired the Disney license, which was previously held by DHX, who are the people who own Family Channel. Because up to this point, Family Channel always had the Disney original programming. And they've clearly been dumping all their resources into launching this new Disney Channel as fast as possible. They scrambled to launch it on September 1st. And then it brought about all these changes that aren't going to be fully resolved probably until the end of the year. And it's apparently also using a brand new license. They're not using the Teletoon Retro license, which seems to be the common assumption. They're actually apparently going to apply for a new one because you can do that now. You can launch a channel and then get the license later because, CRTC is trying to encourage more competition and stuff. So the result is that in addition to YTV and Teletoon, Corus now controls Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and Disney. They have all three of those big U.S. brands.
I think that's pretty much all that matters in the U.S. at this point. There's nothing on broadcast anymore for children's television. Like that's it. There's PBS, but that's not even in whatever. Like there's nothing left for
even PBS. HBO is getting all the first run Sesame Street now.
Right. But that's the thing is like what is left? What is left in America for any other Canadian company to grab?
That's the thing. Are the U.S. brands the most important thing?
I think it's great to have BL if you're trying to I'm wondering what Family's going to air from the States that is new. What is in current production in the United States that Family, now that they don't have Disney, can air?
Well, you have to remember that DHX is pretty big. They own the Deke Library.
Yeah, but that's library. That's not new.
True. But they bought Epitome Pictures, which produces Degrassi. So they've got Degrassi. They bought Ragdoll, which focuses on preschool entertainment. So they're pumping out their own original content for their Family Junior station, and I'm sure some of that's going to show up on the main network as well. And they have Nerdcore, which focuses on boys' action shows. Although I'm sure that if you ask the peanut gallery of children's programming critics on the usual social media circles, you're going to hear a lot of criticism about Nerdcore, but we don't care about them. Even though we are them, but
it just strikes me that they're in a tough position. The hub doesn't do anything new anymore; it doesn't exist per se. So that would have been their angle if Hasbro had stuck with that. Maybe they would have been like, well, we can grab. There's a set of creators that isn't in that now I guess holy trifecta of U.S. children's television creators.
But what's more is that Corus launched Disney Channel now, and while DHX is actually still able to run Disney XD and Disney Junior till December 1st. After that, Corus is going to be launching their own versions of Disney XD and Disney Junior. So you're going to have well over a dozen Canadian children's services all battling it out. And the big question is, are these three family channels going to be enough to fight against them. I mean, is this a monopoly? Would you call this a monopoly? Because I mean, you still have DHX and BBC Kids as competitors to the U.S. brands, but I mean, do you think they could stand up to Corus?
Technically, no, it's not a monopoly because Corus would have to own all children's programming ever in existence. Like, there would have to be zero competition, and there is competition, but you can't look at that and think it's not headed towards a monopoly when they own like 60-70% of the market.
I'd go for even more than that. I mean, when considering what's left. Considering that you'll have, I mean, if you consider that, I mean, it doesn't sound like they're syndicating out all the different variations of Nickelodeon. Though if they did, they could at least, I mean, that would be another couple of channels they could stick in that would be eating up channel space of theirs. But I mean, just having Teletoon, Cartoon Network, and 3 different Disneys, that's 5 channels right there. And DHX is going to try and do 3 plus, and then out of knowledge you get BBC Kids. But I mean, the other side of it is that they have branding in Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network to pop open another couple of channels. They could always spin Teletoon Retro back out. They're in an incredibly, they have, odds are, if somebody's shopping, like say for a la carte programming down the road here, as we have that scenario open up here in Canada, the odds are distinctly in favor of them ending up on with giving Corus money as opposed to their competitors, just because the cultural defaults are going to either be towards the brands that they grew up with, so Teletoon, and I guess they have YTV as well, Jesse?
Yes.
They have YTV, and YTV is definitely not going anywhere.
So, but the thing is on that basis, it's like the odds are that like if they're thinking Canadian, they're going to pick up Teletoon or YTV. If they've got any sort of international focus, they're going to end up on Nick, CN, or Disney, or all of those. And the odds are they're like, what is family? BBC Kids, depending on whether they're Anglophiles, might pull some eyes, but yeah, it's not. It's the kind of thing where it's like, Microsoft technically wasn't a monopoly in the 90s. There's Macs and early Linux, but it's like they still got an antitrust on them because they still were by de facto market share were most of it. So I don't know. Like it does really speak to how much consolidation there has been in the Canadian media landscape, in that because of Canadian media ownership rules, instead of new content from other countries being an opportunity for new owner operators here or something like that, or foreign competition, it's just that ends up being another brand owned by the same Canadian conglomerate. And at least it's a Canadian conglomerate, but they have kind of, I mean, if it's not at the moment, if it's not Corus, and the Shaw, it's something that Bell owns. So
it's interesting you brought up the pick and pay thing, or the a la carte thing. So, guys, as I'm sure most people know, Canadian television is going to switch to the a la carte system, but there's still packages will still exist, and I know that a lot of these Canadian broadcasters are probably counting on the fact that they're going to get bundled in kids packs, and that parents are still going to continue to subscribe to the kids packs. But there's a company in Toronto called V Media. They're like a small, I think, IPTV cable provider, or not cable provider, IPTV provider. And they're only in Ontario and Quebec right now, but they actually started their pick and pal system already. And they launched it so that you pay $17.95 for the basic package, and then you pick any 20 channels you want for an additional $30. So, which is probably going to be enough for most people. So you basically have a $50 cable bill. Now it's hard to say, or it's hard to say how competitive this company is going to be compared to the big players. But I mean, if they wind up being competitive, they spread, and you see the bigger players sort of adapting to this model, you're going to be in a situation where anybody who wants a kids channel is going to, rather than get subscribe to a package, they're just going to grab, a handful of kids kids content.
They're gonna ask their kid what they're interested in watching. The kid will know from friends and playground and online what they're probably going to get, and I think that scenario incredibly leans against family and very much in favor of Disney will be in a superb position, because I mean the other thing is Disney just has brand recognition. Parents will be like, parents that don't ask their kids will probably just be like, Disney's got to be Disney. Blah. If they're familiar with anything out of the States, I feel like Cartoon Network and Nick have a good leg up. Cartoon Network perhaps more so than Nick these days. It's been incredibly just they've been on a roll content-wise, and such that people here are aware of it. Like Cartoon Network merch shows up in the toy stores and stuff, so it's like, kids will be like, I want the show, I want the Adventure Time show because I saw their toy, and vice versa. I want to buy that toy because I see the show. In a way that again,
that doesn't sound
And
like
not
a
only
kid
that, but-
to me. That
I'm sorry, I did an old man kid. But I just seems like it I don't know. Like, I mean, yeah, Adventure Time has gone weirdly up age as it has aired. The fact of the matter is that Cartoon Network is no longer the merch underdog it once was. There's a time where if you were to ask me 15 years ago if we had suddenly been in the same situation of having Disney, Nick, and Cartoon Network available in Canada, Disney still probably would have led that, just again because of brand recognition, but Nick probably would have been the solid second choice just because it was much better together and put itself out into other, it was more visible.
Like, aside from brand recognition and everything else, you have a lot of people now who are our ages, they're mid-20s, early 30s,
Yeah.
They grew up with YTV and Teletoon, right? And also Disney programming, but specifically on Family Channel. But so they're having kids now, and when this pick and play model comes in, they might not necessarily ask their kids, they might just go, hey, I grew up with YTV, I know they've got good programming, I'll pick that. And it's still
Sure.
going to lean in
that's
Corus's
an important thing to
favor.
consider. That's an important thing to consider too. You're absolutely right about
That's still
that.
going to probably put family to disadvantage because that's one traditional Canadian brand up against two other traditional Canadian brands.
Another thing you also have to remember is, I mean, with Corus, yeah, they own all this stuff, but can they really sustain it? I mean, they're not Turner. I mean, just look at Nick Canada. That channel is a pile.
Yes,
it does. It does exist. Well, I'm not sure if I would call it existing. It's a pile of nothing. I would not call that channel competitive.
it's television purgatory.
By any stretch of the imagination. I think Super Channel is television purgatory. In some ways, anyway. But Nick Canada is just, it's nothing. There's no reason why, unless you really want to watch Invader Zim marathons every now and again, there's really no reason why I think anybody would want that channel.
I thought
It also opens.
I feel like everything that's on Nick Canada could be easily also like it would be better rolled into support Teletoon and from the animation side and YTV from the teen sitcom side. Like that would be you'd be better off splitting it in half because the brand is, Nick doesn't own their own animation studios, so like it's not the brand in the same way that I think Disney's a brand or as Cartoon Network's position themselves as a brand.
But growing up, like, all of the Nick shows that I watched were on YTV.
Right.
Like, that's right.
Well, that's why I
Cartoon
think
Network
that's
as
why I
well,
think would
but-
go good together. Is like it would you're gonna you know that the people are gonna kind of lean towards that anyways. And
a lot of people associate those Nick shows with YTV more than they associate it with Nickelodeon as well.
Mhm.
I guess it depends how far you go back, but I think that sentiment went on for quite a while. It's also possible that Corus will cut some of these services too. I mean, I could easily imagine them cutting Nick Canada unless they have some kind of contractual perk to keep it going.
I guess if they're in a position where they can run that and that gets them a deal on then rerunning the exact same shit on YTV and Teletoon later, that's a great move. Yeah, keep that up there in premium where nobody's going to get it except for like, because even in an
Well, that's the thing. There's not going to be premium.
I guess with an a la carte, but the thing is, it's the kind of thing where if they know that a lot of people aren't going to pick that an a la carte over just their traditional line, and it gets them cheaper content for their traditional line, angle in it.
It's a smart business move, but it sucks for those of us who are consumers when we have to put up with the same shows over and over again on repeat on multiple channels.
Yep.
With all this, with Corus owning the rights or gaining with the rights to all these different brands and channels, you think we'd get a little more variety in our television.
Well, I mean, also they could just build once, like if they instead said we've got all the rights to this content, and then just said Teletoon's now just going to be the best damn animation channel in North America because we can just skim the cream of the crop off of all of these things. So it's like you can have new episodes of SpongeBob followed by new Gravity Falls followed by Steven Universe. I'm like, that's like that'd be. You'd have people begging for that channel in the United States because people could just leave it there.
like as I kind of briefly glossed over before, Teletoon at night has now been reduced to Bob's Burgers, Archer, and then followed by a live action movie every night. I mean, the clear implication seems to be that they're going to phase out Teletoon at night at some point and replace it with what? We don't really know yet. Whereas the French version, Teletoon La Nuit, it's actually been expanded. So it seems that they're kind of putting more emphasis on the French Teletoon and a little less emphasis on the English Teletoon. Yeah. That's led to some speculation that they might cut Teletoon English and say replace that with Disney XD. I'm becoming kind of skeptical of that exact speculation right now. I mean Disney XD has a specific action focus, and I mean you're going to have, and if you look at Teletoon's schedule, a lot of their nighttime stuff actually is action focused. They have a really strong superhero focus, sort of in their late primetime hours and entirely on the weekends now. It's possible that they may be shifting towards that entirely for their nighttime lineup in the future, which I think fed a lot of the speculation they might become Disney XD because that has such a big superhero and action focus. True. I'm becoming more skeptical of that possibility now, but we don't know what's going to happen. It's all really up in the air. But like I said, much of the late night time, it's being replaced with, the superhero stuff, both the kids superhero stuff, the adult skewing DTVs like the DC Comics DTV stuff. Interestingly, they're now playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc V on Friday nights.
Yeah.
And multiple times. They play it at 8 p.m., 11 p.m., and 1 a.m. This is actually the first time in years that they've run any kind of anime in prime time. In fact, for the primetime hours, they have not run anime in those hours since 1999, when they ran the manga entertainment titles like Macross Plus and Wings of Hanaemis. And it's actually the first time they've run anime in the late night hours, around 11 p.m., since they ran Akira like 5 or 6 times back in 2008, which was really weird because Akira obviously did well, but still not well enough for them to pick up any other anime.
No,
which was kind
of really weird.
But the thing is that these time slots really strongly suggest that they're gunning for adult eyeballs. It may seem kind of silly, but it seems to me like they may finally be giving anime a chance, and this may be a sign that within this big chaotic influx mess that Teletoon is right now, like we might finally get some kind of like late night adult targeted anime lineup going.
It strikes me that there's an opportunity there, like especially because they have an incredible amount of stuff to try and keep programmed. If they're actually going to make all this stuff work, especially the US stuff, they can't be rating the US networks for content for YTV, but they and Teletoon. But they absolutely, for Teletoon at least, can go and grab, if you're not going to do a Toonami block, which is kind of maybe like that's a big ask because handling CG, even if it's just the same CG being looped over with different voice acting, that's a whole order of magnitude more mess. But if they kind of from scratch or in using, bring back older brands or whatever, and position themselves, there's a lot of content. There was kind of a dearth of content there. There wasn't much great stuff to run for a bit, but I feel like that, one, most of that still hasn't aired in Canada, and two, certainly all this new stuff that has been getting airplay late night in the United States could anchor a revamped Teletoon at night with an action focus. No one's gonna, and you can, again, it buys so much goodwill with people who are going to spend money on you. There's a rule in marketing that your core customers are pretty much that's most of where you're making your money. And ultimately, if you're going to have an adult block, your loudmouth nerds are where you're going to make bank, because they're the ones who are going to, by hook or by crook, make sure that that's in whatever TV package they're buying.
That's what I keep arguing, that any service that has millennials on their radar, you got to remember the niche audiences, because when you're running niche content that no one else is running, that audience is going to subscribe to that station.
I also think it's like, you got to understand that at this point it's not niche. We in Canada certainly, and in the US very much as well at this point, you've had a decade and a half of kids who have been raised with action cartoons and anime in the background. Like, that's not new anymore. It was new for me in like 95, but that's 20 years now. And certainly by the time you get to somebody who's my little brother age and he's getting into Pokemon in the late 90s there, like, he's 23 now and like works an office job. Like, he's graduated university. But the fact of the matter is like, and I'll see his Twitter status, hanging out tonight, watching cartoons. Very obviously that, even the casual folk, if you were to say, hey, we're the new Teletoon, we've got this stuff, there's people who aren't on your Facebook page yelling at you, who are still, in a sense, in your core viewership. And if you provide for them, they're never going to thank you on Twitter, but they'll thank you in dollars, and that's all you give a shit about.
If Adult Swim Canada, just going back to what you said, if they started a Toonami block, I suspect that it would be a very stripped down one. We'd probably get like the absolute bare minimum, like shots of the Absolution floating by, or some of the robots in space with just the latest logo or something.
Yeah,
I think that'd be fine, honestly, if they went that route. And also, if it is true, if they really are trying to gauge adult interest in anime on Teletoon on their Friday night lineups, then this could result in something in either Adult Swim or Teletoon. We don't really know what's going on.
Cartoon Network is in more homes than Teletoon, which means Teletoon is much more, in a sense, in a practical place in the position that Cartoon Network in 2000 and 2001 was in. It's the low visibility place that can afford to be experimental, and thus they should go all in. You've got a chance here, especially before, it's locked. People have this network, so you're not going to immediately lose people dropping this out of the a la carte if you get too weird. You have a chance to, before it gets to that point, try a whole bunch of stuff, get real numbers back on it. And if you're smart about it, you don't just look at those numbers. You try and engage in a meaningful way with your core people and try and get real feedback. Did you like this? Did you not like this? And maybe they have a chance to really find something. Put it this way, at least figure out what we assume would work, and get real numbers to back that up and get the backing to do it that way. They may also find that there's maybe some new option that we haven't even considered that would be great television.
Going back to Teletoon at night, potentially, like, there's the potential there. Like you said, Karl, there's a whole generation of Canadians, 20 to 30-year-olds, who are now paying for their own cable, who grew up on anime. And look at, with the 20th anniversary of Sailor Moon, people lost their heads over it. And I had friends who had the only anime they'd ever watched in their entire life was Sailor Moon as kids. And when they found out that there was a new show being created, they tuned in and they watched it. These are people who do not watch anime and do not watch cartoons, grown adults, and they're going back because millennials have this craving for nostalgia for a time when their life was easier, because now they have to be grown up, and they want some way to relive that. And if you brought back shows like Sailor Moon, you have Sailor Moon Crystal now, which is technically new programming. There's the chance it might alienate because it follows the manga and it's so different from the original anime. But you could have a lineup of nostalgic hits.
No, I mean,
right?
There's also the aspect of a lot of that material has been restored. You've got new digital transfers for all this stuff. So if you ran it, you can get the old people get to see it in a way they've never had a chance to see it before. It immediately fills out your lineup to run the old stuff. You have the new stuff as well. And, you can rinse and repeat on how many different shows. I mean, Sailor Moon obviously is the key one in the Canadian market, but you can do that again with the Dragon Ball series. I mean, it's bizarre as hell that, we don't. Where's DBZ Kai on here?
I think that if DBZ Kai shows up, and it seems like an obvious choice for like Teletoon at this point, I hope that it's the Funimation version and not the long coveted Mysterious Ocean redub of that show.
Honestly, though, at this point, I don't care where it comes from. Like, it has no business not being on television here. It's money that somebody's leaving on the table, and the same goes for Sailor Moon, and the same honestly goes for, there's a lot of like those more commercial properties that aired very extensively and that you could immediately just sort of drop in. And especially if you're going to say, well, we've merged Teletoon Retro into the main line. It's like, well, you know what else is retro content at this point? stuff we were just talking about, except unlike the other retro content we were just talking about, one, even if you were to air the exact same thing, you'd be airing it off of beautifully restored masters, which you do not get for these other shows. So it's not going to look out of place to your younger viewers. It's going to look like they're not going to know it's an old show until their dad comes in the room and says, I grew up watching that. And two, you've got new versions of these shows that you can run right alongside it. The anime is so easy to incorporate into this mold and get both your nostalgia dollar and your new audience in a way that a lot of other shows would actually.
I think about the doors it would open up.
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
No, certainly the second you start running that stuff, I think, it was the Sailor Moons, the Dragon Ball Zs, and the Pokemons and Digimons and Yu-Gi-Ohs that opened up the doors to then say, well, now let's run Gundam, let's run Big O, let's run these things. And today you've got a much deeper library, because I mean something like half of all anime has been created in the last 15 years or something ridiculous like that. Now, a ton of that stuff is garbage, just straight garbage. But there's a ton of that stuff that is better than anything that had come before it. Like, Teletoon at night would be in a better position than the US block, for example, to run something like Madoka, because what's the risk? Like, it's hiding off on a corner right now. Go for it and see what the audience reaction is.
They could air Shimonetta.
Yeah. But you actually make a good point. You actually make a good point in your joke, Jesse. They're in a much better position to try an adult anime comedy in the sense of the wacky hijinks fan service comedy. Toonami can't touch that.
Teletoon, Adult Swim Canada, they could air that show uncut. I mean, that is something that Adult Swim in the U.S. would never be able to do.
No.
And I mean, that show is pretty funny. I thought it was going to be all like, oh, the SJWs are taking away our porn, but it's actually a pretty sharp kind of satire that is incredibly lewd.
It is incredibly lewd, but it's like actually rather. It's like if Orwell wrote a dirty joke anime. Like, it's very much.
Well, I think you said it's like an incredibly perverted episode of Black Mirror.
Yeah, no, it's like I mean, and the thing is that's
which is saying a lot considering the first episode of Black Mirror involves the Prime Minister of the UK fucking a pig. but I mean, but it just would Teletoon make a decision like that? Like how far in should they go? It really all depends on do they have anybody there who could make a daring call like that. Like I don't know if they have like a Jason DeMarco or Sean Akins or anything.
Yeah, no. The problem is you need a Jason and Sean, and then you need a Mike on top of them, and then you need a Betty on top of him. You need Betty Cohen on top of that. I mean, they had a whole stack of management there that allowed for incredibly bold programming for the time, and setting a precedent such that it will be very hard for them. So long as Mike Lazo works there, he's now essentially high enough up the ladder. I mean, shoot, when that whole Aqua Teen Hunger Force bomb scare went down, that should have been on Adult Swim's head. Instead, they fired Jim Samples because basically what it boiled down to, it was better to sacrifice the guy in Cartoon Network who doesn't particularly, he's an exec as opposed to the exec who's actually creative and running one of your more successful blocks.
Just in case anybody doesn't know what he's talking about there, back what year was the?
I think it's 2003 or 2004, something like that.
Yeah, it was like
it was related to the movie.
Like
it was related
15 years ago. It was they put these like light bright things around.
They had the Moonanites on them, and they put them around actually the entirety of the United States in like major cities. But in Boston, people thought they were bombs, and they had bomb squads blow them up. And there was this whole stink about it. And really, this should have fallen on somebody in Adult Swim, but instead. They, in a sense, shifted the blame upwards instead of downwards to the general manager of Cartoon Network at that point, even though really that doesn't technically make sense unless you think in terms of they could get somebody to play GM, money guy of Cartoon Network and Adult Swim. Like, those are Harvard MBAs, dime a dozen, not to disrespect that, but I mean, like, that's something you can train somebody to do. Finding somebody like Mike Lazo or Sean Akins or Jason DeMarco, these are rare people. There's a reason, and the thing is, there's a reason why when Fox wanted to do an Adult Swim-like block, they just had to hire people off Adult Swim. Because that was the only way to make that work. I mean, even when Cartoon Network was doing its doing its first originals program, they stole people from Nick to do it. Like, they grabbed Fred from Viacom. They grabbed Fred Sabert from Viacom to run that back in the mid-90s. That's how this works with television. It's part of the problem that Canada has is really what you want to do is steal a bunch of U.S. execs and have them make this stuff work for you. I think the problem is that the people who would be like really good at running this kind of thing in Canadian media don't tend to stick around it. Like our weirdos don't. They occasionally get footholds. Like, you know, Much had Nardwuar do interviews for a bit, but not forever. You know, we don't keep our weirdos in the loop, and we certainly don't tend to give them more power in a network sense.
No, I was gonna say it'll be interesting to see what happens with Teletoon, because at the end of the day, when Pick and Pay.
Well, we were having another connection problem here. Oh yeah.
Give it a second. No, it's tough. We don't.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, sorry. Continue what you were saying.
What was I saying?
Okay,
but
You're saying you want to see Shimoneta on Teletoon.
Yes, Jesse, that's exactly what I'm saying. No, it'll just be interesting to see when it comes down to it, and Pick and Pay comes into play, whether Teletoon just takes drastic measures because they don't think they can survive. Because if they don't have the ratings going into this, thinking they'll survive, and if they don't have the content, they might not have a choice, any choice but to do something incredibly risky and maybe bring anime back, get some nostalgia in there to bring in Generation X, the millennials, and then from there introduce new shows that they aim specifically at that market because they know that the viewership is going to be there to begin with, or they might just flounder and we might have to say goodbye to a big part of our childhoods.
They should know what will happen if they start running. We have, like I mentioned earlier, you have like the peanut gallery of people online that you find talking about complaining about the lack of Bionics and the lack of anime and things like that, just like there was in the States. In the States, I mean, you had like a very small, devoted set of people who would always go on about how much they missed Toonami and everything, people at Toon Zone who were just sort of holding the torch for it. And that's kind of happening with anime for Canadian TV now. As soon as like one of these networks shows some kind of like little sliver of hope that they're going to start running shows, and people are going to start flooding out of the woodwork and start making a big deal about it online. And then it's going to be like they'll air something like, something obvious like Attack on Titan or Kill la Kill or Space Dandy. People will be coming out in droves, just kind of, again, out of the woodwork.
Attack on Titan seems like such an obvious first step too these days. Like it's very, 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 very well regarded. It just seems like a very easy way of saying, all right, we're running some other action stuff. We want to try something, and we want something that's maybe, fresher. It's, widescreen, whatever. Because, I mean, obviously they could run stuff from the Cartoon Network had long since aired on Adult Swim, and it would still be fresh here because even there's a lot of stuff that never got up here. But
I was gonna jokingly recommend Pilot Candidate, but it's not licensed right now, thankfully.
No, and hopefully never again. Like if I ever hear our friend Jose at Discotheque is like, hey, we got the Pilot Candidate license, and I'm like, I hope you're sending the master tapes into the sun. Like, do us all a favor.
They should go the extra mile and only release the Toonami edited version of that. But hey, yeah, like, I mean, if you want to see something happen here, I mean, if you're part of a ratings tracking service, I mean, definitely watch those Yu-Gi-Oh airings, spread the word about them.
Well, and get on these communities and sort of try and participate positively. Be like, hey, I would watch this, I would pay for this, especially as Pick and Pay comes up. Just start telling them like, you know what, I would pay for, and just list stuff. Like, just be like, I will pay for. Hashtag I will pay for, and just list shows at Teletoon.
I like it. That could catch on.
Well, I mean, what I did was I actually haven't subscribed to Teletoon in 5 years. I actually added it to my cable package this week, and I sent an email to Teletoon telling them that I did that. And I said, hey, I did this because you added that anime to prime time, and when we get to the a la carte future, I will continue to pay for your channel if you run stuff like Attack on Titan, Kill la Kill, Space Dandy, or maybe I should have. I didn't say Sailor Moon. I know I should have said Shimoneta.
You didn't know to at that point.
I didn't know to at that point. That's true.
There's a possibility that, I mean, if you I mean, it's kind of annoying because there are better ways that they could probably get a gauge of their audience. I mean, by day I work at a company that does this kind of research and builds software for it. I know that they could. There's no excuse for them to not know, because loudmouths who love cartoons are a big piece of their audience, especially for their adult block, and it is easier than ever, if you're willing to pay a little money to do it, to get that information into your hands in a way that's even more accurate than social media. They could be doing this, and they should be. And if they're not going to do it of their own volition, we as the people who who care about this programming have to incessantly bring it to them and make the point in a way, like I said, tell them what matters. I would pay money for this.
Yeah, don't just constantly bombard them with, why aren't you playing the show? I miss Bionics.
Yeah. Don't be like I miss Bionics. Be like, I would pay for Bionics.
Yes.
Because they live by Wu-Tang rules. Cash rules everything around them. So tell them that.
When you have a lot of people complaining about something online or saying that they'll watch something online, that doesn't necessarily translate into ratings either. But when you have 9 out of 10 people on your social media channels specifically demanding something, it's usually a good sign that you should listen to them and try and give it a chance.
Seems like a reasonable plan.
Well, that was Zon N Canada. Hope you had fun. Thanks to Karl and Brittney for stopping by to chat on these pressing issues. Just a reminder that you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and if you could leave a rating or review on any of those services, it would be greatly appreciated. You can contact me through Twitter @ZonNCanada or using the comment form at zonnen.ca. Thanks a lot for tuning in. See you again.